Well, China's annual National People's Congress has just wrapped up in Beijing, and the message from the top was for the country to dominate the global tech and artificial intelligence sectors by the year 2030. Our China correspondent Allyson Horn has been covering the event and says those ambitions will have to be negotiated during times of tough economic issues.
A couple of main elements have just been adopted here. Firstly, the Premier's work report, which sets out the GDP target for the next year. Now, importantly, that GDP target has been reduced for 2026. It was previously sitting around the 5% mark. Now it's been reduced to a target of 4.5 to 5%. Now, that might seem like just a small decrease, but it is actually quite significant. It gives quite an indication into the position of China's economy, the strengths, the weaknesses, the headwinds that China is facing as it stares down a weakening economy, a shrinking demographic and workforce shortages. The other main element that was just adopted here in the closing session was the next 5-year plan, the 15th 5-year plan for China, which, as the name suggests, sets out the priorities and goals for China for the next 5 years until 2030. The cornerstone of that plan was around technology and AI, artificial intelligence. This plan to have China essentially dominate the world in tech and AI by 2030, including an incredibly ambitious plan to have AI integrated into 90% of China's economy by 2030. Now, that plan covers everything from robots and humanoid robots through to AI systems in the workplace, quantum research, brain interface. It's a really broad plan, but it hinges on China being able to become self-reliant in that area, and that's incredibly crucial because at the moment China relies heavily on high-grade hardware from the United States, including the really powerful AI chips that it needs to build and roll out these massive AI systems across the country. So at the moment, there is a major roadblock for China being able to achieve that goal, but there seems like there's a lot of optimism going forward in trying to achieve these aggressive and ambitious plans. It would, if they succeed, propel China as the winner in the tech war with the United States.
Yes, you spoke earlier about China having its lowest economic growth target in decades, but what might this mean for China's trading partners like Australia?
Yeah, I think this is something that Australia will be watching closely because China has a massive problem at the moment of underconsumption. What that means is within China's domestic market, people are not spending. China's economy over the last few years has been propelled forward and buoyed by its record-breaking exports. In fact, in the last year, it recorded more than $1 trillion in trade surplus. And while on the face of it, that sounds good for China's economy, it also means that the economy is heavily reliant on just one sector. And so China's leaders have recognised this in, I think what most analysts have said is quite a responsible and realistic approach to the economy going forward, recognising that China needs to kind of rebalance the stakes here to get people within the country spending more and not being so reliant on exports. And that's important for other countries, including Australia, for example, because it could mean that if China is not successful in this and it continues to have these record-breaking export surpluses, that other countries look at measures to try to control China's dominance in that space. Already, for example, Europe and some European nations have indicated that they might put tariffs on the export of some Chinese goods or the import to their countries. And we've seen in places like Europe, for example, that there are markets there that continue to be decimated, like the car markets, the manufacturing markets, for example, as China's dominance increases with this export supremacy. So Australia, no doubt, will be watching watching this and waiting to see what kind of instability this creates, not just within China, but more globally as well.
Yes, of course, Ali, the war in the Middle East is casting a shadow over just about everything. How big an issue was this during the Congress?
It wasn't specifically mentioned throughout the NPC. There were more kind of vague references to global instability and challenges to hegemony and global power shifting dynamics. I think it's pretty clear what they were referring to, of course, the United States and some of the challenges that have been brought to the forefront by some of the actions of the United States. And of course, this NPC comes off the back of a succession of Western leaders coming to China to try to reset relations with Beijing after periods of relative pretty bad relations between a number of European countries and China, for example. So a lot of Western leaders will be looking at this and trying to gauge the direction of China in the future, how that's going to affect their working relationship with China. And importantly, this summit comes just a few weeks before the United States President Donald Trump is meant to also be here in Beijing for a pretty historic meeting with China's President Xi Jinping. There was no mention of that summit in the NPC, but I think it's clear that a lot of people are wondering how this relationship between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping is going to continue to unfold, particularly as this war in the Middle East continues to entrench the United States.
And finally, Beijing is now set to approve a new law to promote ethnic unity. Tell us, what's that all about?
Yeah, it has just passed through the Congress just a few minutes ago. This is called the National Unity Law. On the face of it, China says it's to increase, as the name suggests, national unity, to try to increase nationalism, and also, importantly, China says, build up allegiance and commitment to the CCP, the Communist Party of China. But human rights groups have expressed grave concerns about this law because what it does in practice is it prioritizes Chinese traditions and practices over some ethnic minority practices. So, for example, in schools now, Mandarin will have to be the #1 language that is taught. In areas like Tibet or in Uyghur societies or in Mongolian societies, those languages will now not be taught as the main language. Likewise, those languages on signs, on road signs, for example, will now not be prioritised as the main language in those areas. It will be Chinese, in fact. China, for its part, says that this is all a part of trying to increase the brand of China, increase national pride in China. But critics of this law say that this is now just entrenching what has been, in their words, a long period of repression for ethnic minorities across the country.
Okay, lots been happening there clearly in Beijing. China correspondent Allyson Horn, thanks very much for explaining it all to us.